we've seen that there's a strong correlation between a country's economy and its intelligence. And you now served in intelligence, which was one of the better years which our country was performing economically. What is it that was happening during that term that we are not seeing today?
Well,
one, is there a correlation?
okay. In terms of intelligence, in terms of the military, in terms of social welfare, whatever arm of government, police, the courts, you will only advance if you have a state. These are all state institutions and structures that serve the will of the people. And you find the will of the people through the electorate. In the earlier period when I'm Minister of Intelligence, and I've already mentioned that in 2004, Mbeki wins almost 70% of the vote, the apex of the power that the ANC has, and where you would think that the state, because the state are these institutions that are permanently there, housing, education, and so on, intelligence, and the government who gets voted in every 5 years. And yet I become Minister of Intelligence and I find it divided. And I begin to realize, because it's all happening invisibly, that there are elements there that are actually looking at succession past Mbeki and are siding with a simple man, as I use the term in my book about Jacob Zuma, because he's far from a simple man. He projects himself as a simple man. He's far from it. That's the title of the book, A Simple Man. And here are elements and at the top in intelligence who are split. The most energetic force is wanting to push Mbeki aside and bring in Zuma. That now we find happening throughout state structures, and the ANC is split and divided. And that's how this thing, like I was going to say a rotten fruit, opens up, because the rot was setting in. And I would say that the elements who are supporting Zuma are the more corrupt, and beginning to see, well, this way, instead of the ANC going on about we serve the people, we're not serving ourselves, it's these guys who are already taking bribes and the corruption's becoming embedded, that they are now prepared to support the most corrupt person.
So that they can eat.
So they can eat more. Yeah, as simple as that. Now it becomes more complex because you actually find forces on the left. Okay. So COSATU and the Communist Party are also going along with that move to get rid of Mbeki, not so much for a motivation or an agenda that I've referred to of self-interest, but more because they are viewing Mbeki as standing in the way of a more decisive progress for the workers. They feel there's been a sellout in relation to the economy, and there's an element of this which is factual, in that we had, from the time we started in 1994, the RDP. Okay. And now from
The RDP, the Reconstruction and Development Plan
program.
Oh, program. Okay.
Yeah. And now with Mbeki brings in 1996 what was called GEAR. Okay. And that's more towards a privatization program in effect. And we're looking to the World Bank. Trevor Manuel makes his speech in 1992 in relation to that. Up until that time, we're supposed to be going for a macroeconomic policy based on the Freedom Charter. But with that speech of Trevor's, and clearly he could only be projecting it if the president and deputy president of the ANC are in favour and pushing it. That's Mandela and Mbeki. But I would say, and they outstanding leaders of our country, but they, I would say, are believing that we must go gauchely with the World Bank and the imperialists. This is the way to survive and to grow.
And this was the NEC of 92, right?
Yes.
Where?
Yeah.
Okay. But
so it's a very complex period, but I'm again in broad brushstrokes trying to say what's the change that takes place and the complexity, so that as we go through a very positive period, because under Mbeki we get to a point in 2004 or so where the GDP is now 6%, the highest we've ever had. So and I might be sounding critical of him. I'm trying to look at a bigger picture, and I'm saying that there's no sellout as such. I feel that the judgment that we took was incorrect, but these are people from Mandela and Mbeki who are not corrupt, who are absolutely committed to finding a way from the political control into the economic, and they bring in black economic empowerment and stuff of that nature, which unfortunately only really assists the top echelon of black society. So
from an ownership part, I guess the management has been a bit different.
Exactly.
But I'm there. I just have a question, one that puzzled me a bit and actually led me to read the book about the Simple Man. In Armed and Dangerous, you briefly touch on your interactions with Zuma, especially in Swaziland, and one got the view that there was a positive light around Zuma, that he was a calm man, accommodating, kind guy. And then one comes to the book, and it seems like it seems like there is a change. Where did one realize, what happened in the gap between the two books?
Well, I know Zuma from Durban in 1960, where I was working after having grown up in Joburg. And he was a trade unionist, 17-year-old. I'm 4 years older than Chris Hani, Zuma, and Mbeki. They were all born, and Paulo Jordan, they were all born in 1942, and I'm 1938, so I'm their senior.
The real good one.
And so he was smart, committed young man who shone out. I meet him many years later in Maputo, where he's a leading person in the political work inside the country. And that is now in 1980, where I worked with Zuma there. Very engaging, and I enjoyed it at first. But I soon began to doubt him. And not because of greed for money. It didn't show. He was a very simple person in that respect. He drove a little Volkswagen Beetle around Maputo. He was seldom in a suit and tie and so on, dressed very simply. He was not a drinker. He wasn't extravagant in a lifestyle at all, and worked very hard. But then I started realizing that there were these other meetings he was engaging in, like secret meetings within our clandestine involvement of the movement, building an underground, and that was basically ethnic. And then other people would be talking, even leaders like Joe Modise and Joe Slovo, that Zuma's more just an ethnicist. He just wants to work with Zulus, really. And he's got his secret work about that. That's shocking. Totally against what the ANC's about. Totally. Yeah. It's like reactionary as it can come.
It's tribalism.
And that was the aspect which one began to see. coming back into the country, then something else kicks in. There are business people in our society as well as in the West who are now looking at this ANC emerging from exile or the underground. They are looking to see weak characters who would be susceptible to bribes. And you see somebody who's got 20 children or more, several wives, no bank account, no savings. We didn't live wealthy lives outside. That was a fantasy, a creation of the regime, the apartheid regime, to try and slander us. And it's well known that there are people in Durban who began to ply Zuma with funds. And they did this with others as well. So it's not just Zuma, but there are many people who are offered career choices, free education for their kids, nice cars bought for them.
Is this where the infiltration begins, at this era?
Absolutely. The whole gamut of what is corruption. And these people then become corrupt. They fall prey. And that's what's happened. That's the cancer that then spreads. And it's not that black people are just the ones who are corrupt. The corruptees are actually white business, from the very top echelon of business in South Africa and abroad, these countries. And that's why the poison has infected not just the ANC. I mean, some of these other organizations standing by Israel.
No, but I mean, some of them also do say that.
How much money are they all getting from the Zionist purse? Huge amounts.
Which we are going to come there now. But before that, with Zuma, what do you think his plan is? He wants to save ANC,
well,
MK.
Zuma he sticks to it. He wants power. He doesn't want to go to prison. He'll do everything possible not to, just like Trump and Netanyahu. If you have power and you're somebody who can mobilize forces in society, even the courts and the prosecution are rather wary, and the system can give you the breaks. There's nothing like the law serving rich people more than the poor. Okay, this is where we come into the question of the Freedom Charter and equality that we want to see in our country. So Zuma's actual objective is very simple. He wants to preserve his wealth and his freedom. He wants to gain power. He is clever in a very opportunistic and reactionary way, seeing that there is power in terms of an ethnicity. And he's not the only one. This populism, which we also see in other countries, and Trump is a prime example of white racists
Making
in
America
the USA.
great.
We see it in other countries, in Europe, for instance, or in Africa as well, let's say, any countries in the world, from Bolsonaro in Brazil to Modi in India and his preaching towards Hindu ethnicity and so on. So there's this ethnic factor in South Africa that people can play into, very dangerous, very reactionary, and that's his game, to get power and to be represented in Parliament, and the dream of coming back as a president, which he'll never see.
Yeah.
But this is, people become very arrogant, and it's a narcissism that Zuma suffers from, and people like him, and you see it with Trump, that they believe that they are above everybody else, cleverer than everybody else, can outsmart people, and will use any ploy, and especially this populism, this reactionary nationalism or ethnicity, and it's very clear where he has his basic power base and how he plays on that.
Okay. So now, I mean, when I reached out for the interview, there was one thing you were non-negotiable on, that if we're going to do this interview, you have to come out and brief us as to what's happening in Palestine, Gaza, Iran, the States. What's it about? What are they fighting for?
Well, at the root is, again, what I've referred to in global terms and the division in the world. On the one hand, what we call imperialism, which is what colonialism has been at its base. The colonial empires crashed because of people's uprisings after the Second World War. These colonial empires became very weakened. The French, the British, the Japanese, the Spanish, the Portuguese, and so on. But we've seen for 5 centuries a world in which Europe, from which capitalism emerges, based on the slave trade and their supremacy as Europe over the rest of the world, and then the USA becoming the leading force representing the capitalist world. And against that are the former colonial powers, the Russian Revolution, which was a revolution against capital, the Chinese Revolution. So the question of how the world is in conflict between those of capital and imperialism, the highest stage in conquering the rest of the world for its resources, and the anti-imperialists, China amongst them as a leading force, not fighting to replace America and dominating the world. They haven't invaded countries. They don't have bases. America's got 800 bases around the world. Why?
China have a give and take.
To control the world in order to rob the people of the world of their wealth and resources, which makes Britain and France and Germany and the USA above all so strong and mighty. And within that then, that context, we come to understand the struggles between these two, NATO representing the West. And NATO is the key force, as we see, in its attacks through Europe on the Soviet Union when it existed, the communist world, the communist countries of Asia, from China to Vietnam to North Korea, and domination through the American empire and their bases, including Britain and France, who have, after America, they come second and third in the bases around the world, like about maybe 20, 30 each. The Americans 800, to control the trade routes, to ensure they have the hegemony and supremacy of the rest of the world.
And that is what President Putin is fighting when he attacked
exactly,
Ukraine, to prevent that.
Yes, exactly as you say, with Putin and Ukraine, because NATO, and so there we can even say NATO land, this alliance of the American empire and Western Europe and some of these states that were formerly communist or socialist in Europe, who were brought out of that system when the Soviet Union collapses. So this is NATO, that power. And in terms of this, you look at the resources of the world. You mentioned Russia. Russia's a sixth of the world. It's got incredible resources. The weaker Russia is, the more the West can plunder it and create a balkanization, such as they did in Yugoslavia, another former socialist country which they crushed. You look at the Middle East. You look from Palestine through Iraq and Iran to India and to where China is in the resources of the East. And therefore you see in Israel what Reagan had already called our battleship in the Middle East, our aircraft carrier, and Biden uses the same, and we see this with Trump. So the Palestinians, who were the indigenous people of Palestine and lived there for millennia, they are uprooted and they are attacked ever since Israel came into being, which is a settler colonial state of Jews from Europe, essentially, pretending that this is their land because they use something that isn't history. And that's the Bible. That's fables in relation to faith, God, etc. It's people think that's history. It's not. They must realize it. But in terms of the Middle East and Palestine, which is so strategic, you've got the control of the area, especially if you've got now this particular state that you've built up with billions of dollars from America and Europe's support, Israel, to control as the policeman of the Middle East. And Iran is threatening that because Iran is the emergent regional power of that whole area. So the support for Palestine links into the domination of the Middle East and the whole of that region, going right through from Iran to India and beyond. And so any country in the world, you must ask yourselves, where does it figure in relation to the interests of France and Britain and Germany and the USA? And that's where you find the revolutions in Latin America through the centuries, and especially Cuba, that has survived, because the USA was, in terms of several hundreds of years after the Spanish colonizers had been weakened and crushed and lost power, and America then attempted to become the controller of Latin America, and did to quite a degree. Cuba was the revolution that opposed that, and Cuba has managed to survive against the blockade and the sanctions. The same applies Russia, China, North Korea. You see, where you're not strong enough, you're smashed, like Gaddafi, who tried to do that in Libya, in Iraq, Saddam Hussein, and they smash these countries, and you get chaos in those countries.
How safe are we? I mean, we took a stand with Palestine. Next thing, there's genocide.
Yeah.
And now we're seeing other countries getting bombed. How safe are we?
Well, we can't say that we're safe. The world is going through a very torrid period. The possibilities of nuclear war, because the Israelis are desperate. We've seen with the Americans, and the Americans, the only country in the world prepared to use nuclear bombs, the atomic bombs that were dropped on a Japan that was already finished. They couldn't fight any further in that Second World War. They were finished. The Americans tested their nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These are the brutes. These are the biggest danger, the most reactionary center of threat to the world is the USA, and with it, its allies in Europe, the NATO forces, which is why when we assess where we stand and who we should support, we look at the whole world and we see where is the center of reaction. It's Washington. And with Washington, it's control of Western Europe and more into Central and East on the borders of Russia, and conquering the rest of the world, or holding on, because, and this is the positive side, the masses around the world are in a state of movement, of uproar against the control of Western capitalist imperialism. And they see this, in addition, as the white people of white supremacy, because race has been used by those capitalist powers to make it more easy to suppress people of these continents, which are the brown people, the black people, and so on. So the race factor comes in, but its center is capitalism, and in its highest form, as Lenin pointed out, monopoly capitalism, imperialism, where they're using this military might and finance capital to control the world through force and through trade and through their currencies.
My final question. you mentioned earlier that basically everyone needs to pass the baton on. When you're passing the baton on, if you're now passing the baton on to future leaders, current leaders, what is the message you would put into that baton?
Well, quite interestingly, just a couple of weekends ago, the ANC Veterans League, who have very strong will and intent to pass on the baton so that the younger generation, the ANC Youth League and the youth generally, take up the principles, the morality, the aspirations of previous generations that fought through against colonialism, against apartheid, and broke through to create democracy and the possibility of real political and economic freedom and strength and power of our country in economic terms as well. For that we need the same qualities and values of the Chief Lutulis, the Bram Fishers, the Walter Sisulus,
Joe Slovos, Chris Haney's. I mean, but we have it in Traore, right?
And that message is what's fundamental, so that we have a clarity of our understanding of who we are, what our country's about, and where we sit in the world, and where power can reside through international solidarity with all those fighting against the imperialists, and every country in their minds and their objectives is to create a strong, progressive, sovereign, independent country that will work with others. We see that in the global south, but we're not racists. We also see that there are social forces, working class, youth, women in the northern hemisphere that also have their problem against the self-same capitalism in the form of the Trumps and the Starmers in the UK and these dreadful leaders of France and Germany, etc. We see the uprising of people in those countries. So they are our allies too in the need to create a better world of our dreams. And we must know that our dreams aren't Mickey Mouse, they're not Disneyland. They're about the possibilities that human beings can create a better country where they live and a better world based on a common humanity, based on our need to ensure that the environment, the ecosystem of our planet is in the best possible health in terms of what is needed apropos of climate change and the environment for every living creature. Because the world is also in a terrible state, as we know, in terms of what the ravages of capitalism that are unchecked. So it covers everything from class struggle, from race domination, from the pollution of the planet to gender equality. And we all have in common, all the countries of the world have the main forces of their society, maybe not the top 10%, the top 1% that own more than half the wealth of the world. All these statistics. So we are the many, as Jeremy Corbyn points out, and they are the few. And if the world peoples can unite behind what are obvious and clear in terms of what the problem is, but the media controlled by these forces of reaction, unfortunately, they bamboozle people. And this is where political awareness must come to the fore in terms of study and understanding and analysis, what Karl Marx would refer to and did, that the philosophers have hitherto sought to understand the world. Okay, so that's knowledge, that's the information, etc. They've sought to understand the world, but the question is how to change it. The point is how to change it. So it's not that we say study and have a good political understanding. You've got to link that, merge that, the Marxist term, dialectically interconnected with the struggle of people, the practical struggle at the grassroots, at the regional levels, at the national, at the continental levels, where we create from country to country the force of the people that can conquer the power that's resided in a minority and use it for the benefit of all. That's what I, in a simple way, I'd end this interview. Young man, the baton goes to you.
Thank you. We take it, me and all of the viewers.
Thanks
and we will
very
do
much.
our best. But yeah, thank you. Thank you for making time. Thank you for being selfless. And, you know, and engagement you had with Shea in that interview. There was a quote that he had that I'd rather be a free man in my grave. And that seems to be a principle that you have honored, and we hope that continue to see it through you and your counterparts. You can also do the same. Like, subscribe, share, comment. Let us know what you want to hear. And thanks. Thanks a lot, guys.